I grew up in a small rural town where nothing ever happens. The sort of place where it wasn't unusual to leave your doors unlocked and your closest neighbors are a mile or so from your house. Our family also had this giant older cat, Tag, who was a bit of a drama king, but we loved him. One summer when I was around 9 or 10 years old, the cat starts going ballistic. Tag generally slept in my room curled up next to me until I fell asleep, and then would get up to do whatever cats do in the middle of the night. Occasionally he would meow or try to wake me up on unfortunate nights when he could see the bottom of his food bowl and needed a midnight snack. Usually if I ignored him, he would give up or rarely go try to wake up my mom instead. This night, however, he bangs against my parents' bedroom door until he gets in, and is meowing loud enough to wake up the dead. Our bedroom doors were next to each other, and I called to Tag to come to bed, because it's 2 a.m. He's having none of it, and is carrying on. My mom gets up and goes to the kitchen, and then huffs back up with Tag on her heels, still meowing insanely. She said his bowl had plenty of food, and he just walked her to the door of the kitchen. Tag was an indoor-outdoor cat, but had his own cat door through the garage, so there was no need for one of us to let him outside. My mom said my brother must have left the kitchen door open, and just the screen door was shut, but she wasn't holding it open forever for the cat to just stand there and not go out. She shut the kitchen door and went back to sleep, firmly shutting her bedroom door this time, so Tag couldn't let himself back into her room. I always kept treats for him in my room and offered him one, but he was still meowing at the door, trying to get them up. I grabbed him and brought him into my room and shut my door to try and get him to sleep. I lay in bed trying to go back to sleep, and Tag meows at my door wanting back out. I finally open my door and he bolts back downstairs towards the kitchen, and that's when I heard what sounded like a door slamming. I have 3 older siblings though, and someone is always up watching TV or running to the bathroom, so I think nothing of it. The cat finally stalks back into my room, but instead of curling up in my armpit like usual, he sat at the bottom of my bed staring at my door. I fell asleep until morning when some commotion wakes me up, and I pad down to the kitchen to find my parents on the phone with 911. My parents got up as usual to get ready for work, and while making coffee, my mom went to grab her rings from the little jewelry dish she had by the sink, because she would take them off in the evenings to rinse dishes and load the dishwasher, but discovered the dish was empty this morning. Small town, so the sheriff sends a deputy over, and when my dad walks out to meet them, he sees the ATV is missing from out back. The key is off the key ring. My brothers are all up at this point too, and we're all freaked out that while we were sleeping some robber came in and removed the ATV key and saw an opportunity to take my mother's rings. They were asking if we had any clue when it happened. My parents said absolutely not. My mom asked my middle brother, who was a freshman in college and home for the summer, what time he ended up off the couch last night and if he heard anything. He said he went to bed at 10 or 11 and asked what she meant as his bedroom was in the basement and he wouldn't have heard anything in the kitchen. She said, "But you were in the living room off the kitchen when I went to feed the cat and shut the door you left open, and I told you not to sleep on my couch and go to your bed as I went back upstairs." He told Mom he was in the basement since dinner and never went out or came upstairs again. He watched a movie in the basement living room before going to bed in his own bedroom. My mother turned white and realized that the cat must have been trying to warn us someone came into the house, and the robber dove onto the couch and covered up to hide when she came to the kitchen and exited after she went back to bed. The cops said for someone to be so brazen, they probably knew our family, knew our habits, but didn't count on the cat being so overprotective and had probably intended to steal more, was afraid that the cat may wake the whole house. It's been over 20 years since this happened, and the robber was never caught. But it is unnerving to think it was probably someone who had been to our home before as a friend. Thank God for our cat. So my grandmother had dementia, and she used to stay with me because nursing homes were expensive. She would often get up in the middle of the night confused and walking around. It usually wouldn't bother me, but this night was different. On this night I remember it being late, and I was getting ready to go to sleep. It was maybe around 1 a.m. As I'm getting ready, I can faintly hear small footsteps on the creaky wooden floor. I figured it was my grandmother getting up to use the bathroom or something, but when I stepped out of my room, the bathroom had nobody in it. This is when I heard a soft humming noise coming from my grandmother's room. It sounded like someone was humming a song. I walked up to my grandmother's room, and the door was almost fully closed. I opened the door to find a pitch-black room. The light for some reason wouldn't turn on, so I used my phone's flashlight. As I looked around the room, I realized the humming was coming from the closet. As I got close to the closet, the humming then stopped. I opened the door and my grandmother was standing there with her back facing me. I put my hand on her shoulder, and she slowly turned around. She had a smile from ear to ear and just stared at me. I never forgot that night. So creepy. I was around 12 years old when this happened. I lived in a duplex that my parents owned, and one day I was outside in the front yard playing with my dogs. The house was located in a neighborhood that's right by a busy main road, so during the daily rush hour the area got very busy. Thank God for this, because as I was busy with my dogs, I noticed a black car in front of my house that kept inching forward a little and backing up a little. I noticed the driver leering at me in a creepy way, and I got a really bad feeling. I ran up the stairs to where I lived with my parents. I told my mother about what had happened, and I have no idea what was going through her mind at the time, because she didn't seem at all concerned. A few minutes later, she sent me to the grocery store that was a block away, and after griping about it to her, I went walking to the store. As I was walking out the exit while leaving the store, I saw my brother waiting for me outside. He told me to get in and drove me back home. He had been listening to what I told our mom about the guy outside the house, and he reamed her out for making me walk to the store alone, knowing that this guy was lurking around in the neighborhood. To this day, I still get chills knowing how close I came to potentially being raped and or murdered by a pervert. It makes me sick to even think about it, if I'm being completely honest with you. This story is from my sister who is 6 years older than me. We're very close and she doesn't have a Reddit, but this encounter still boggles her mind and mine as well. The timeline isn't exactly clear, but she was still in high school in the early 2000s. There's a campground in California by some Indian reservations that our family grew up camping at. This campground is one way in, one way out, and is an hour drive through a secluded, dark, winding road off the main highway, just to get to the actual campground itself. Her and her friend were camping with some friends there one weekend. Her and her friend were planning on leaving Saturday night late to head back home. They left to head home late, and about 15 minutes into the drive, on the winding road they came across a car that had crashed. She said there was car debris all over the place, plastic, glass, fluids, dust, as it just happened, and a flipped-over car with a man screaming for help. She said he was bleeding and looked like he lost control on the road and had flipped over. No cell service, and no civilization for another 45 minutes ahead. The closest help there was a ranger station back at the campground, 15 minutes from where they had just came. Her and her friend got in their car, drove back to the campground fast to alert the rangers. She said they all headed back to the crash site less than 30 minutes later, and there was absolutely nothing there. Nothing. She's talking. No skid marks, no car, no debris, no car fluids, and no man. There's no way any of this nature and mess could be cleaned up in 30 minutes' time, especially for that location. Thinking maybe it was a different turn, they drove ahead more and more along the dark, winding road until the main highway, and no sign of anything. She said the rangers radioed in the authorities, asking about a possible crash and cleanup at all that evening, and nothing was reported. I asked her if they were drinking or anything alike. She said absolutely not, because they knew they had to drive home that night. Her and her friend had a very hard time after processing this, because they had no clue what they witnessed. Her friend ended up going into therapy because of it. My sister did not, but still talks about it to this day. She said her and her friend were trying to do as much research as possible to see if there was anything reported, car crash, accident, and never found a thing of such incidents that night. Confused and still creeped out. It gives me chills. Last week, me and my significant other went on a hike at nighttime. It had been around 12 a.m. We went on this wooded path, and though it was eerie, we figured we would be fine as we had each other. We barely saw anyone until we start going up this path, see an individual further ahead of us with a flashlight on. They turned it on and then off a couple times. We continued walking up the hill, the person in front of us. Eventually, at some point, they went off path and we no longer saw them. We continued up the spot we were headed and stopped there. We sat and talked, made out for about an hour. Then, as we were making our way back to the secluded area's exit, we heard rustling in the bushes near us. We both looked over expecting to see an animal, till we realized the rustling was too loud and the shape in the bushes was too big. It was a fucking person. They rose their head up a bit and we caught a glimpse of a flashlight as they started to emerge out of the bush. I quickly realized whatever was happening was very off. Out of fear, I screamed and took off running. My significant other followed a bit behind. At first, I heard more than just a few footsteps, meaning he attempted to follow or chase us, potentially for a few seconds. We got away. I'm not sure when he got in the bush, if he was there before us, but that means he was sitting there for over an hour in silence by himself. I don't know what exactly that was or what he was doing, but I would hate to have found out what happened if we didn't run. I actually don't believe in ghosts and all that stuff. I never doubted the fact that ghosts don't exist. Only after this encounter is when I first started thinking ghosts could be real. So when I went on a school trip, I was in a room with about 5 friends and we got pretty drunk with some other people. When we went to sleep, a friend of mine who was brushing her teeth saw a woman in another building in front of a window just staring at us. I could literally feel her gaze on me. We all gathered up in front of the window and just waved at her. She waved back. At first I thought nothing of it. Went to relax about an hour later. I had a quick peek out the window. She was still staring. This really creeped me out, so I called my friends again. We began shouting at her to fuck off, but she wouldn't move. My friend started to dance or something, and the woman copied. I thought it was just a girl messing with us or something. She had black hair really long in front of her face and like weirdly long arms. We went to sleep, but me and my friend couldn't really sleep, so I just looked out the window again and saw that she was gone. I looked for about a minute and saw her walk across the window with her hair floating. I know it sounds dumb, but it's what I saw. I later took a look again, and she wasn't there. But then I saw a hand come around the corner, and then her head peeked around the curtain. This seriously scared me to death. I just went to bed after that and never saw her again, or just any people in the building. I also have a picture of her, but it's kind of blurry. Has someone else had an experience like this? please share in the comments section. When I, a 20-year-old female, was around 11 or 12, I would hang out at a park across the street from my house with my friends. It's not a super popular park or anything, more just the neighbor side streets nearby, but it's a proper playground. A friend and I were there more towards the evening, maybe around 4 or 5 p.m., sitting at the top of the playground, looking up at the sky. We hear someone walking on the path nearby and turn to look. There's a decent height, thin dude in a hoodie walking our way. Mind you, we're now the only 3 people in the park. We stay where we are because we figure, the guy must be walking the path through the park, past the playground and out the other end. Nope. The guy comes off the path and starts walking across the wood chips over to the playground. At that point we get up, kind of chuckle and just shift around nervously. He slowly starts climbing the stairs, dead-ass eye contact the entire time. This is where we were really nervous. Us being at the top of the playground, we go down the big slide, start walking around the side back to the bottom to see if this guy is actually following us, or maybe it's just some dude wanting the playground. The guy goes up, comes down, walks around the side. Now we took the longest way around, weaved a bit. This guy does the exact same thing. At this point he seems to be speeding up to catch up to us. My friend and I look at each other, and we just book it out of there. The man starts running after us until he sees we're running to a house, immediately turns around and beelines it out of the park from where he came. This is probably the closest I've ever been to someone potentially trying to kidnap me, or someone with me. Definitely not the only close, creepy encounter I've had as a kid, though. Thank God this park is so close to the houses. My family and I went on a trip to the Hocking Hills area of southern Ohio a few weeks ago. There was a place that I always wanted to visit, the abandoned ghost town Moonville Rail Tunnel. I've never been to this area, so I didn't know what to expect, but I did know it was pretty deep in the woods. We took a trip from our rented cabin using Google for GPS for the location. We started driving and it's, for lack of better words, real impoverished, where we are driving hills have eyes type style. We literally only saw a few cars on the way. We get to a point where we need to enter into a forest, and we were close to a tunnel. There was a sign that said we were entering Bubba Wood. For a little additional information, I drive a Mercedes that I am just lucky enough to have, and have my husband in the car, a black man with dreadlocks, my 10-year-old nonverbal autistic son, and my 6-year-old daughter. We drive down this really creepy stone road into the forest, and there's nothing back there. No houses, no cars, nobody. We see signs that we are close and pull into the parking lot. We walk over the footbridge and make our way towards the tunnel, which is a lot larger than I had expected. We hear this sound coming from the other side of the tunnel that goes into the woods and away from the parking lot. A truck comes driving through the tunnel towards us while we were on foot. He gets out of his truck with a chainsaw, and it's a white guy in his 60s. He walks with my entire family everywhere we go and through the tunnel. I tried to make small talk with him and pull some info out about if he worked for the Department of Natural Resources. He really wasn't budging. We turn around to walk out of the tunnel, and he starts using a chainsaw behind us. The sound is just echoing through this tunnel. At this point, we have no cell phone service, and literally no one knows my family is out there except us. I was already worried my car was sending the wrong idea to people like we have money or something. We don't. We rush to the car to get the kids in their booster seats, and this motherfucker comes driving over the footbridge in his truck towards us in the parking lot. I honestly don't know how this truck fit on it. He stops again and gets out of the truck and starts walking the other direction, much to our relief. About this time, I notice there are some dusty handprints on my car. I asked my husband if they were his, and we compared his hands and my son's, and they were not a match. I don't know who could have touched the car, because we were there with the chainsaw man the entire time. Just a few minutes later, I look in my rearview mirror. There was a bunch of dust kicked up behind us, and there he is. He had to have driven pretty fast on that stone road to catch up that quickly. There is nowhere to go in these woods. The road is basically one lane, and we have no cell service or GPS. Every time I think we lose him, he's there again. I'm waiting for my tires to get popped or something, or for this guy to ram me off the road into a ravine. Finally, we get out of the woods and I turn out, and he's still following. We were following printed directions to get back, and I ended up making a wrong turn in the excitement. The guy in the truck was finally gone, and I turned around to go back past the stone road that goes deeper into the forest. There was one lone house near this road, and there is his truck. He had to have seen us drive onto this road into the woods and taken some back way to the tunnel. I don't know if he was just trying to protect the site from more graffiti or what, but he really creeped us out. It was like a very scary movie trope rolled into one single event. I walk to most places because, being severely visually impaired, obviously I can't drive. I walk at night during summer, which lasts anywhere from April to October if we're lucky. This is probably not the safest idea, but I'm from Texas, so temperatures of 100 degrees aren't unusual. One of my usual destinations was a convenience store a few blocks from my previous home. I set out one night normal to get myself some Pepsi and a candy stash. Our town isn't very big and most people drive everywhere. It's very unusual to come across anyone else on my route to the store, but that night a man appeared out of nowhere and started talking like he knew me. He asked me where I was going, and I told him. It wasn't unusual for people to keep watch on me, because hard of hearing blind girl with forearm crutches. This guy had no reason to be there, was walking way too close beside me. He asked me where I was going, and I told him just in case I was overreacting. I sped up as much as I could since this part of the route is very dark with only a subway that had been closed for the night. He definitely wasn't there for a $5 footlong. I tried to appear calm, though the alarm bells were ringing, and I was shaking to the point I was afraid I would drop a crutch, which was probably the worst thing that could happen right then, especially after he started asking what I liked in the bedroom, and he could easily have had his way with me in a ditch and no one would have known. I felt sick but continued my walk. The store was only about 20 yards away, and I knew the guy that was working the graveyard shift. I got safely inside and my friend handed me a bag to carry my stuff in. And when I got up to the register, he began speaking loudly enough that my ears hurt, and I had to turn my hearing aids down because it hurt my ears. "Hey Sweets, did you ever find my 3DS?" I played along and he opened the half door thing, and I sat on the stool like it was normal. The creepy dude came over and slammed his Bud Light and a 10 on the counter. After being handed his change, he went outside. He's still out there by the ice machine. After about 20 minutes, he still hadn't left. My friend called his manager, and after explaining the situation, she told him to lock up and run me home. He did and even walked me to my door. I got my key in the door and we stepped inside. Catherine said to give this to you. He handed a keychain and showed me how to lock and unlock the pepper spray. Call us before you come from now on. He's come in after you for the last 4 weeks. He left and I made sure every door and window was locked. So creepy dude, let's never meet again. My boyfriend, 23-year-old male, and myself, a 23-year-old female, recently decided that we wanted to take the new tent we bought on its first trip. The tent was one that hooks up to your car to provide more storage space, and we were very excited to try it out. We had planned a kayaking trip the next day at a kayak rental shop. It was supposed to be nice, inexpensive, outdoorsy weekend getaway. We tend to book things last minute, so all the state parks and professional campgrounds were full. This led us to a website that is essentially an Airbnb for campsites. The place we chose was a 100-acre property, just 20 minutes south of the kayak shop. Of all the sites in there, it was described as having working bathrooms, showers, it allowed for campfires, and all the sites were car accessible, important for a car-dependent tent. This site was also the most reviewed in the area with 3 5-star reviews. The area was very rural, so we did not think much about the low number of reviews for any of the campsites. The renter was Mary, who only ever texted us updates, but seemed sweet. We started out our 2-hour drive a bit later than anticipated, which put us behind the 11 a.m. time we had originally informed the host, but we tried to keep her updated with the new schedule as we went along. She just told us to let her know when we arrive at the address she sent us. We arrived to the address and are greeted with the barn from the pictures. It had string lights all over it, seemed fairly new and just had a nice feel to it. We sit in the car for a minute and struggle with cell service to text the host to let her know we had arrived. 10 minutes after our text sends, a sweaty man appears to be in his 60s pulls up in an ATV. He lets us know he is the father-in-law to Mary, and she is busy taking care of the seasonal harvest and sent him instead. He let us know we can take the car anywhere on the property and offers to show us around in the ATV. My boyfriend, visibly uncomfortable, declines the offer and asks a few more questions about the woods and how far into them we're allowed to take the car. Anywhere. There are no designated campsites. We can go anywhere, and the ATV man even offers to help pull my car out if it gets stuck. We ask one final question about cell service, and he jokes that if we are from around here, we will understand that reception works better on one side of the barn than the other. I am from around here and thought it was funny, but once he said that I realized he didn't have any ounce of an accent from here, like he should. Eventually he leaves and we began exploring the property on foot. The barn is nice and maintained. It was fully lit in the middle of the day with string lights decorating the interior as well. It is insulated and has a working kitchen. The only warning we got was to not drink the water. It seemed like a place that would host small 50-guest weddings. We walked past a shed out behind the barn to get to the trails that ran through the woods. After going through a hike that my car would have never survived, we decided it might just be best to camp by a small creek. We choose a spot on the side opposite the barn. We were still within walking distance, but we used my car as a buffer to feel a bit more isolated. We chose our spot and then got into the main town to eat and walk around. We messaged Mary about the fire policy, and she tells us that they will deliver a fire ring to the barn for us to take to camp. We arrived back at the barn about an hour and a half from nighttime. We drive by the barn and the lights had been turned off. We assumed it was on a timer as to not waste energy or money. We also noticed the fire ring had not yet been delivered. We start the grueling 30-minute setup in the sticky heat and reward ourselves with a sit-in air-conditioned car. We notice it looks like it's about to rain, so my boyfriend and I pull out a card game and wait for it to pass in the car. It only lasted about 10 minutes, but it's starting to be sunset. The tent held up nicely, so we felt okay leaving it for a second. As we cross the creek, we hear what sounds to be like someone in the shed moving things around. A bit unsettling, but I tell my boyfriend that maybe they used equipment today, and it's just sitting in there making the cracking cool-off noise that it sometimes does. We get to the barn and the lights are still off, but the fire ring was there. We go in and check to make sure the power is off, And it is not just the lights outside. None of the light switches will work, so we assume the power is cut. Again, maybe it's just on a timer. No worries. We step out of the barn and get 10 feet away, and we hear a hum in the distance to the opposite side of the shed. The power to the barn is then restored. We change directions to use the bathroom. As soon as we step inside, the power cuts. I start to get a weird feeling, and I can tell he has it too. I look to my boyfriend and say, maybe they're just watching us. I immediately follow it up with, no, that's a lot worse. We walk back outside and the lights turn on. My boyfriend says that we need to leave, and I have the same gut-wrenching feeling, a primal fear. We put the ring back on the barn since we had moved it 10 feet, and the barn lights start flickering. We briskly walk back to the car. Being from Appalachia, I know better than to run. The 30-minute setup was torn down and packed up in 5 minutes or less, and we jump in the car and lock it. I managed to get my car going, thanking God that the rain did not get my car stuck. We start towards the driveway, and just as we made it to the road, my boyfriend looks back and sees a man standing by the shed, watching us. As soon as my car pulls off onto the road, we get a text from Mary letting us know that the fire ring is outside of the barn. She also informs us that we are welcome to stay in the barn if the rain had messed up our camping experience. We arrive at a nice hotel willing to splurge for safety. At this point, it's 10 p.m. at the earliest. A sweet older lady checks us in. Desperate for validation and just comfort from anyone, we tell her what had just happened to us at the campsite. She looks genuinely shocked. She asks if we had seen the news lately, which we both respond that we had not. The lady tells us that the couples in the state had gone missing. All of them had gone camping. 3 couples were truly missing, and one was recently found on the side of the freeway slashed to near death. They are, to the time of my posting, still recovering in the hospital. We couldn't find any more articles about where in the state, but the look on the lady's face suggested it was near us. We get to our room and text Mary back to tell her we are not staying. Thank you for staying with us. We lock the door and I break down into tears. I will not forget that feeling I had in the barn. The primal fight or flight feeling, and the feeling of being watched. I felt it in my throat just writing this. I never want to experience that again. So this happened to me when I was 11 or 12 years old, over a decade ago, and I still remember it vividly. At the time, I lived in a semi-detached house with my mom, dad, and sibling. It was decent size, but the most impressive part was the garden, which essentially had 3 levels. The first level was concrete, the second grass, and the third, also grass, had a trampoline on it. At the very end of the garden was a tree embankment. The area I lived in was somewhat hilly. One morning I woke up to a cracking sound, like a snapped branch, and I was worried since a week earlier a tree from the embankment had fallen onto our neighbor's garden. My bedroom was at the back of the house overlooking the garden, so I opened the curtains to see if another tree had fallen. Instead, I saw a guy hiding in one of the trees in the yard. He was pale with blonde hair and wearing all black. He was looking directly at me, presumably because he saw the curtains move. He started smirking and moved his finger in a come here motion. I totally freaked out, shouted for my mom and dad to come into my room. I was so scared and I physically felt like I couldn't move. This was super early in the morning, by the way, around 5 a.m., so it took my dad a good 30 seconds to get in my room, at which point the stranger had hid behind the trees. I remember being really shaken up. I was crying while I told my dad what happened. He went out into the back garden to see if he could spot the guy, but he was gone at that point. A bit of time passed and I started to forget about it. Then, 3 months after, my mom and I were watching TV together after I finished school. The doorbell rang and my mom went to answer the door. I looked out the window of the living room where we were sat and saw a white van parked outside. It was the same van as my uncle's, so I walked out of the living room and into the hallway to say hi. When I got to the porch where my mom was stood, I realized it wasn't my uncle. It was the same guy I had seen in the garden a few weeks prior, and it really freaked me out. He noticed me as I walked behind my mom and gave me the same smirk as when he was in the garden. I wanted to say something to my mom, but I couldn't. I was freaking out inside. Anyway, he just asked my mom if she wanted work done on the drive. She said no, and he left, got back in the van and drove away. He didn't give her a business card or anything. The van didn't have any company branding, and he didn't knock on any of the other neighbors' doors. I told my mom that it was the same guy as soon as he went, and she started to feel uneasy about the situation too. A month or so after that, I got my first job doing the paper route. I had to deliver 300 papers with my best friend at the time. It was getting towards winter and it was dark around 4:30 p.m. We'd been doing the job together for around a month, when the one evening after school it was super dark and rainy. We were halfway through delivering the papers and a van started following us. The van was driving really slow at the same pace we were both walking. We clocked that it was following us after about a minute. We started to panic as I noticed it was the same man again. We left the newspaper trolley and started walking quite fast up the hill. We were about a 10-minute walk from my house. I rang my mom, who made me stay on the line while she left the house to meet us. She told us to go to the corner shop that they were about a minute away from. When we made it to the shop, the van sped off very quickly. The police were called, who came to my house for a report. We told him everything. That was the last time I ever saw that creepy stranger, but I still remember what he looked like so vividly. This happened some years ago. I was 20 at the time. I was going on a road trip of sort with a really good friend of mine and his family. Our destination was a concert in a country next to ours, but we would be stopping at night to sleep in the camper we drove in. We hadn't crossed the border yet when we stopped at the first campsite for the night. Now, it seemed like a pretty family-friendly and safe place, so none of us had our guards up. That night at about 11 p.m. or so, while my friend and his family were getting ready for bed, I went outside to get some fresh air. Our camper was almost completely next to the beach, so I went down to the shore to dip my feet and get some much-needed quiet time by myself. On the way there, I passed by a beach shack, a detail that will be important later. As I stood there, letting the waves lap over my feet, I noticed the silhouette of a man further down the beach, but it was a public space for campers, so why would I think anything of it? After being absorbed by splashing in the water with my feet and enjoying the moonlight, I decided to make my way back. Of course, it was very dark given the late hour, but I don't scare easily. Now, as a woman in the modern world, I usually do stay on guard after dark, but that thought never occurred to me since I felt I was in a safe environment so close to the campsite. Anyways, as I was walking back, I noticed that the silhouette of the man further down the beach was gone, but even more worrying was the fact that I was nearing the beach shack, and I saw that someone seemed to be trying to hide from my view behind it. Immediately I was on alert and called a friend I knew that would be awake. I gave the shack a wide berth while talking loudly to my friend about how she was coming to meet me. After not too long, I got safely back to the campsite, hopped in bed in the caravan. I didn't tell my friend or his family, because though I was scared, there could have been many logical, non-threatening answers to what I saw. I put it out of my mind, and the rest of the trip went off without a hitch. About a year or so later, I was talking to my friend about the trip, and suddenly remembered the creepy experience. As I told him, he slowly got pale and told me something his brother had told him and his family over breakfast, months after the trip. That same night after I had gotten back and gone to bed, his brother had gotten up late at night to get some water, but when he passed the window right by his bed, he saw a man standing right there outside, looking in the window. As soon as he was seen, the man left, but it definitely creeped out the brother a lot. But just like me, he seemed to put it out of his mind. Now, with both of those stories, it doesn't seem far-fetched that the man hiding by the beach shack had followed me back. I'm really scared to think about what would have happened if I had been alone. My fiance and I, 34-year-old male, 31-year-old female, were taking a 10-day road trip in the late summer from Houston to Tennessee with multiple stops in between. We left Houston around